When we listen to politicians, we often complain that their words don't seem to mean anything. And that's because they don't mean anything. There's a mismatch between political ideas and politicians' words. It's not that the poor things don't have ideas, it's just that they're not allowed to utter them. The party machine is too risk-averse to countenance real speech. But try looking back to ancient Greece and Rome. There, the art of rhetoric was at the heart of political life. Rhetoric can have a bad name, as if it was tricksy or deceptive speech. But the bottom line is it's the skill of using reasoned argument to persuade. Recapturing some of that lost art might be a good idea, and at least it might get us beyond all those identikit sound bites.
I believe we succeed as a society when we move together, not when we drift apart. These are my basic beliefs.
Platitude.
And it's all underpinned by one idea, that it's only when working people succeed that Britain succeeds.
And that's another platitude.
And it's because of these beliefs that I believe that this is the most important election for a generation.
Dreary stuff. What is he saying? My bet is that someone else helped him write it too. In ancient Rome, the historian Tacitus was dismissive of a speech given by the Emperor Nero and written by a clever speechwriter. It was, he wrote, just borrowed words. Well, that's what we have. Borrowed words, or endlessly repeated ones. A phrase is thrown at us time and time again as if it was the party's message. Take George Osborne.
Our long-term economic plan is working.
And our long-term economic plan, the long-term economic plan.
A long-term
Put the record on.
plan that you hold to. A long-term economic plan.
A long-term economic what? Nick Clegg obviously thought he was onto a winner with this one.
Alarm Clock Britain. What I call Alarm Clock Britain, Alarm Clock Britain.
That was one of the great failed sound bites. Paul Clegg. He was wanting to appeal to us hard workers getting up early in the morning, and he'd forgotten that most of us don't have alarm clocks anymore. It's pre-selected music for us. Sometimes, though, the political class hit on something catchier.
We also want to help hard-working families.
Britain's hard-working families.
For hard-working families.
That's one that everybody seems to hate. Clichés are nothing new. Cicero was capable of churning out phrases like the alliance of all the good men. The point is that Roman politicians were trying to persuade their voters of a particular argument. If persuasion isn't at stake, we might just as well vote on the basis of our existing prejudices. We need to think about how to change people's minds, not just to reflect what they already think. In the 1960s, Roy Jenkins was one of the most revolutionary Home Secretaries we have ever had. It might have been the swinging 60s, but the views of most voters were far from swinging. And he needed to persuade people to sign up to the end of capital punishment and to decriminalise homosexuality. Roy Jenkins didn't need voters to be overwhelmingly positive about what he wanted to do, but he did use argument to persuade them at least to accept it, as in this speech on immigration, a huge issue in the 1960s, just like now.
Immigration, in reasonable numbers, is a cross we have to bear, that if only those who had come could find jobs back at home, our problems would be at an end.
Margaret Thatcher was certainly one who used borrowed words and slogans, but for better or worse, she was certainly a persuasive politician who invested a lot in the ideas and the argument.
Today, the conflict of interest is not so much between unions and employers as between unions and the nation. That's why people are supporting us in legislating for trade union reform. We place special emphasis on the secret ballot.
She's got practical proposals there, and she's trying to persuade us to go with them. I may be wrong, but I don't imagine that any of that was written out in single sentences on a teleprompt. Amongst all this sloganising, I find myself thinking back to Socrates, at least as Plato presented him. He was about getting to the bottom of an argument, about not giving up on it, about facing his own ignorance and confronting his own prejudices. But most of all, he was about having a real conversation. As we face an election, the party machines must allow politicians to persuade us, the voters, to back their solutions, not just assert, bribe or promise. Then people might get engaged, they might have something to think about. If I could bring back just one thing from the ancient world, it would be the art of rhetoric, persuasion through argument.